So let's start. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Rice University, Ken Kennedy Institute, for facilitating this discussion. Truly happy to be here. My name is Lenchner. I'm CEO of Bright Data, and I'll be your host for this morning. Together with me is Dr. Tomer Simon from Microsoft, and we'll introduce ourselves separately in the next slide. But let's start with a bit of housekeeping before we dive into the lecture itself. First of all, let's not make it a lecture. So it will always be a lot more fruitful discussion if you'll just jump in, just unmute yourself and speak up, or raise your hand virtually, or write something in the chat if you want to comment, share feedback, ask a question, anything else. Let's try to do it this way. We'll have also dedicated time for questions, but I think that if you'll jump in during the session, we'll be able to focus it more on the things that you care, and this will make it a lot more interesting. Other than that, we'll go over a few slides, then we'll have a short break, and eventually we'll go into discussion, Tomer and myself, but you will have to be part of it, otherwise it won't be as interesting as it can be. So please share your thoughts. Let's start. So data for good and responsible automated data collection. How do you ensure data for good? That's what we're going to talk about. In more details, we'll talk about, is there such a thing, data for good, and what does it mean in practical terms? We'll try to simplify it and be more specific so we can actually understand what it means. How should we make sure that data that is collected is aimed for good, and many other related things that we'll talk about. Let me start first with a short story. Just yesterday, I met someone that you all know, I guess. I met him face to face, physically. It's still, we can arrange that today, even with COVID. That person is the artist, the well-known artist, will.i.am, which I adore. We talked about various things. I talked mostly about data. This is what I know, this is what I do. While he talked about his own initiatives that combines technology, art, and social impact. And we realized that together, while we were speaking, we realized that one of the enablers to do good, and this is what he's doing with technology, art, and social impact, he's doing good. One of these enablers is access to data. And we'll talk a lot about this today. First, let's start with the short introduction. I'll start, and then Dr. Simon will introduce himself. So my name is Lenchner. I'm CEO of Bright Data. I've been the CEO for almost 4 years. I'm a product guy. I started my career as a product manager and VP product, and I'm leading this company for the past 4 years or so. This is what I'm doing with one hobby that I have, which is surfing in the ocean. So I both surf in the ocean and over the web. And that's about me. Dr. Simon, I'll be happy if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. So very happy to be here, and thank you all for hosting me. So I'm the chief scientist of the Microsoft Israel R&D Center, and for the last 7 years, more than 7 years, I'm deeply in AI, also was part of my PhD. Today, I'm engaged in many AI projects and, of course, the future of AI. But also, in the last 3 years, I became also internally a champion of the responsible AI concept. And I'm a member of a number of governmental committees that also deal with various aspects of the responsible and ethical impact of AI. And I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion later on. So thank you all, and hope to have an interesting discussion and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. What we'll discuss today and how it will flow. So very quickly, we'll talk about the definition of Data4Good. And again, I'll be happy if you'll share your insights. We'll talk about responsible automation. It's an important part of how we perceive data, which is automating the data collection process itself. We'll have a discussion of how should we treat this data collection automation. Sorry for the design to be a bit off, I see it now. We'll talk about regulation, if it exists, if it should exist, how we should do that. Then we'll take a short break. Then we'll have a discussion with Dr. Simone and myself, hopefully also with you. And we'll summarize it with what are the solutions, at least from our point of view. So, as you know, data is created both offline and online. What you can see on the screen right now is a glimpse into 60 seconds, 1 minute, of how data is constructed online. We're talking about 4.6 billion people connected to the internet. It means 60% of the world's population. So it's not a wonder that we're dealing with such a data obesity reality. We're talking about 2 million views in Twitch in 60 seconds. Okay, just always remember that we're talking about 1 minute. Okay, when I'll be done with this slide, all of the numbers here already passed, and we're moving to the second minute. We're talking about over $1.5 million spent online, just 60 seconds. We're talking about over 2 million swipes over in Tinder in just 60 seconds, and so on and so forth. So this is a huge amount of data that is being added to the internet every single minute. Now we're talking about both public and private data. Okay, 2 million swipes in Tinder or 200 million emails sent in 1 minute. This is private information. 700,000 stories shared over Instagram is public information, for example. Seeing the price of a product on Amazon, this is public information. This differentiation between public and private is very, very important when we talk about web data. So when we talk about web data, let's try to focus ourselves under the right context. Are we talking about public data or private data? For this discussion and the next slides, we will be talking about public data. So, about bright data in a minute. First of all, what I just described in the previous slide basically means that the internet itself is the largest database that the humankind have ever knew. This is the current situation, but it's also growing every day. The problem is that it's not accessible for all. This is at least the problem that we as a company try to help solve it. We're talking again only on the public data. Even though that the data should be public, that's not the case. It's also very hard to understand where you can find this data, how to extract it. This is what we're doing in Bright Data. We build tools that help companies and also non-commercial organizations, we'll share a few examples, to effectively collect publicly available web data. Why do they need this data? We'll share a few examples in the next slides, but basically to get better decisions. It's very similar to electricity. If you will give people access to electricity, they will build the most incredible things. If you'll give people access to web data, they will build the most incredible things. So it won't be a refrigerator or a TV that needs electricity, but it will be other amazing products that sometimes can even save lives. And again, we'll share a few examples in the next slide. We're probably the largest industry-leading web data collection platform today. We serve thousands of customers, including Fortune 500 firms, from a variety of sectors such as e-commerce, finance, including banks, security, cybersecurity companies, and even the largest advertising companies. We're over 330 employees, and we've also established the Bright Initiative, and we are here talking as part of this initiative. We'll talk about it in the next slides. Some of the 30 plus use cases or industries that are working with Bright Data today in order to be able to collect publicly available web data. I'll cover them fast with just a few examples, and then we'll talk about a few specific examples, and we'll dig into them so you better understand what they're doing and why they're doing that. E-commerce, that's the easiest to understand use case or sector. Just think about yourself as consumers. You want to buy something online, the new iPhone, the new AirPods, a new TV, a new anything, or even a used something used. Usually you will open your browser and you will open 4, 5, 6 different tabs. Each tab is a different e-commerce. It is a different store. Then you'll search for the product you want to buy, and you'll get a decision. You'll get a decision where to buy it. Usually the decision will be based on price or shipping times. Maybe you'll read a few reviews on all of the websites. Maybe you'll check the photos. And usually also you will do a lot of calculations in your mind that you don't even realize that you're doing. But eventually you'll get a decision, and you get it fairly fast. If you want to buy it, you'll buy it in a few minutes. All of these e-commerce websites want to understand how they can win you as a consumer. Is it taking the price down by additional 20%? Is it shortening the delivery times and making sure that you'll get it 2 hours faster? They want to try to understand what will make you to buy with them and not with someone else. To do that, they're doing two main things. The first thing is to analyze their own user traffic. And the second thing is to understand what's going on with their competition. So they will try to understand what you as a consumer sees virtually, not really what you're seeing, but how the landscape is constructed, what's going on with their competition. For this part, for understanding the full picture, what's going on with their competition, they're using us. That's the e-commerce example. So they'll try to understand the price for that product in 20 different competing websites and shipping times and photos and the reviews and all of that. Eventually, it's very good for the consumer because transparency creates competition, and eventually you'll probably pay less or get a product faster. Very similar is the travel industry. Think about yourself trying to rent a car if it's COVID and you can't fly, or trying to book a flight or a hotel room. Same thing, you'll open a few online travel websites and search for the best time of the flight that fits your schedule, obviously the best price, and probably tens of other data points that you don't even realize that you calculate in your brain. So for the same reason, these websites or companies, this industry basically needs to collect publicly available data and calculate it into their own algorithms to make sure that you will buy that product, in this case, a flight ticket, for example, on their website. Just a couple more examples and we'll move on. Security. We see cybersecurity companies and also just large corporations with their own cybersecurity teams wanting to see the web as if they are real consumers or real internet users. Why? Because that's the only way possible to protect real users. So, for example, if you're a social media or social network that monetize your business through advertisements, you want companies to advertise on your platform, this is how you generate revenues. This is how most social media or social networks are working. You also want to make sure that your users who are using your social media platforms won't be at risk. So one example is that a user on their social media account will see an interesting ad. They'll click on it, but eventually it will take them in this dangerous path. And eventually there's a bad guy or a hacker or someone behind this advertisement that will try to steal your data, to steal your credentials, to insert a malware into your computer, various bad things that can happen. It's very hard to monitor all of this and to find these quote unquote bad guys. Actually, these are really bad guys or hackers. One of the ways to do that is to collect massive amounts of data from your own social media platform in this case, and then analyze it and try to understand who's good and who's bad. That's just another example for what you can do with our tools, or generally speaking with web data collection tools. Last example I'll share is the finance industry. We have large financial institutions that are using our tools to try and understand the financial landscape to get better investment decisions. One example is a large hedge funds that are using our service, and they, in one occasion, they wanted to check the prices of all of the bleach that they can find on e-commerce websites. And they collected this information, price of bleach, for a few weeks, and then they analyzed the trends. Why? Because they wanted to decide if to invest in a chemical company. And one of the chemicals that that company produce is being embedded in bleach. So this is just one way they could use public data, price of bleach, in order to conclude on something completely different. In this case, a decision if to invest in something, yes or no. Let's move on. And if someone has questions, reminding you that you can just unmute yourself, or if you're shy, you can write something on the chat. To give you a quick glimpse into the Bright Initiative, here are some of the organizations we work with. Partners include the United Nations, Princeton University, Oxford, King's College, the UK government, and many more. Just an interesting story of how it all started with the Bright Initiative. Also, another way to understand the power of web data. So in March of last year, when COVID started, it started here in Israel at around March of last year. It started globally a bit earlier. We, Bright Data, got an approach from a very talented group of researchers here in Israel. And they had a theory that you can somehow try to understand if you have COVID or not without trying to find, without going to take the test. And just reminding you, we didn't have back then, none of us, home tests or some quick tests. Sometimes you had to wait for like 4 days to be tested. Their theory was that maybe there are enough devices, smart devices, spread around the globe with a specific sensor that can check your blood saturation. That's how much oxygen, that's basically the oxygen level in the blood. And there are some devices with this, it's called SpO2 sensor, but they had to move fast and they couldn't understand how they can validate their theory and if it's true or wrong. So they came to us and they asked, maybe somehow with just your capabilities in the public online data industry, you can help us. And we told them, give us 24 hours. I took it as a personal project with 2 of our best engineers. And under 24 hours, we were able to get back to them, just based on public data. And we told them that their theory is correct. So we found out that around 17% of the world population that holds a smart device, like a smartphone, smartwatch, or these smart wristbands, should have the ability to check their oxygen levels in blood because they have this SpO2 sensor. It was good enough for them to take the next step, and a few weeks after, we already saw that in some health protocols, you were able to, you saw this step of, if you own one of these devices, take the test yourself, and if you have, I think it was under 95% oxygen levels in your blood, maybe you have COVID, stay at home, don't spread it, and then take the test and so on. Today it's irrelevant because we know a lot more about COVID, and everyone can just test themselves at home. But back then it was very interesting to see, and we were very proud about that. And then we realized that as a commercial company, we can also have another entity related to us, basically giving our tools pro bono for free for other entities that can use it to do good in the world. And this is the slide that you currently see. So over 300 organizations already joined the Bright Initiative, including the top universities and the research groups that are using our tools, including a few examples that we'll now talk about. Yeah, this is what I want to see. Okay. So let's go over a few high-level examples, and then I'll talk specifically about the couple. So WIPO, which is World Intellectual Property Organization, it's a UN, United Nations agency, is using our tools to try and detect intellectual property breaches over the web. So if you own something, let's say a photo that you've taken and you've uploaded to the web, you have the rights over this photo. There's a huge problem in the internet that these rights are being abused. Someone might reuse this photo without giving you a credit, or it can be something over also more significant than that. So the UN has a team or agency that is trying to protect intellectual property over the web. For that, they need to understand what's going on. So the first step in order to solve a problem is to understand it. And to understand this specific problem, they need to have the ability to scan the web and to get all this data. And they're doing it with our tools. The UK government, that's the second example, promotes cross-nation initiatives. The UK government launched the NDS, National Data Strategy. It's going on for over a year now, and we're supporting them with the Bright Initiative and trying to understand what data means, what web data means, how they can promote digital skills, especially data skills in the nation and so on. HDI Labs, that's the third example. They are using our tools to fight human and sex trafficking. Very interesting, and we'll have a specific slide about that. Matheson, fourth one, are making less visible talent visible for recruiters, basically adding the diversity into the recruiting world. We'll also talk about that. And the last example, which we'll also talk about, is one customer of ours that is using our platform to help citizens to find a shot for vaccination in the US to fight COVID. Let's dig into these examples. So let's start with what I just talked about. Findashot.org it's basically a community service project that would help people find available COVID-19 vaccination or vaccination appointments actually at local pharmacies. So each pharmacy, each city, each state, each country, they all have various guidelines for who can get the vaccination, how to make the appointment, when you can come, what you can come with, but the main issue is to find a place to go and get the vaccination. Today, it's becoming less of an issue because it's already well spread and well organized, and there are usually enough vaccinations. But when the vaccine just started, this was it was a beautiful tool that they built with Bright Initiative. So basically with Bright Data Tools for free. And they scanned all of those local pharmacies, their websites, and extracted the relevant information from their websites. For example, what are the opening hours and how many vaccinations are left. And they gathered it into a very easy to use dashboard for each of you, each of us. You can just add the zip code and you would see all of the information gathered in one nice dashboard instead of going to Google and start understanding yourself what's going on. So that was beautiful. It was basically a discovery website for COVID-19 vaccinations. Another example, Matheson. Matheson is a US-based diversity hiring technology company, which has tapped into web data collection to gather and source information from diversity talent networks to identify talent. Once they collect this data with our tools, Matheson presents the information about job seekers to companies that are looking to hire diverse candidates, allowing them to reach out and start recruiting. Okay, so just think about it. The data is there. The fact that the company is hiring it's public. You can find it on the company website, careers page, for example. And the fact that you as an individual is looking for a job it's also public if it's in your LinkedIn profile or you posted a post about it somewhere. You need to do the match. And in order to do the match, you need to be able to collect this data and then to analyze it and to match it. These are the parts that Dr. Tomer Simon can probably talk a lot about as an AI expert afterwards. So this is what Matheson are doing. Third example, and again, if anyone has questions, just unmute yourself or write it in the chat. So HDI labs are doing something pretty remarkable. They are saving lives, and you'll just be shocked and amazed from how you can save lives just by being able to collect and analyze the data that you can find on the web. We're not talking about the dark web or some sketchy places. We're talking about Craigslist or social media, the things that you can find there. And then after running the relevant algorithms over that public data, you can literally save lives. I think that I'll just read their CTO testimonial, just 10 seconds, so you can understand. He said, we perform ongoing data collection of commercial sex ads, reviews, profiles, and as we continuously access these data sources, we immediately run them through a processing pipeline that extracts notable intelligence, for example, phone numbers, perform syntax analysis, image analysis, and etc. As data is processed, we compare it to the rest of the database in order to identify actual individuals related to the collected data. The ultimate goal is to build a database of individuals that we can use to detect and act upon potential victims and predators of human trafficking. Just to understand that it's not just saying saving life, but it actually happens. With web data, they were able to identify over 50 potential cases just in the last 4 months. These are for 50 human beings that potentially can save their lives just in the last quarter. Now, again, this data is there. It's public. You just need to be able to understand what data you should extract, and then to add in this case, HDI Lab's secret sauce, which is also analyzing it to get into the right conclusions. Pretty amazing, I think. Now, swift move into automation. What we're actually doing is to automate manual work. So if you will have endless amounts of resources, for example, all of Rice University students will get a laptop, a computer, and will need to take 2 hours of their day in order to go into websites and collect publicly available data. So your task will be to collect all of the prices of this specific product. You'll invest 2 hours every day. Your colleague task will be to do exactly the same thing, just for a different product. It can be done manually, but it's very, very inefficient. And we're talking about huge amounts of data that needs to be collected. So probably every single person in the world will have to do it full time, 24 hours, and it still won't be enough. What we're doing is taking all of these virtual billions of computers and removing the human factor, basically automating everything into one machine. These are the tools that we're building. This is what we're talking about. It's also making it not just possible, but also very efficient. So what can be done manually, but maybe will take you weeks, years, can be done in minutes. So let's discuss the ethics or responsible conduct of it all. First, what does the industry think? What you see here in this slide is a recent survey that we ran with the leading research firm Vincent Byrne, who looked into US and UK decision makers from financial services, IT, and technology organizations. It uncovered clear demand in both regions for enhanced regulation to drive effective, compliant, and responsible bot usage. What I described in the previous slide, this one, it's basically a definition of bot. It's automating manual labor and letting a machine do it. What we can see in this slide is the industry saying that it's great, we're doing it also, but we need to make sure it's compliant, it's responsible, it's ethical, and someone needs to regulate it. It also gives a future indication, as you can see in the numbers, that almost everyone, 95% of organizations surveyed, plan to expand their automated functions. And with that bot usage in the next 2 years. So basically they're saying, we're doing it, let's regulate it, and we're going to double it. We're just going to do a lot more because it's so effective and efficient. And this is not just about the examples that I gave of web data collection being performed by bots. It's also other things that maybe we'll talk with Dr. Simon in the discussion later, like bots that communicate with potential customers. You all saw them when you went into a website that sells something and you had a small pop-up in the side of the screen starting to communicate with you, and you knew that it's a bot. So this is all the bot activity that is just expanding and growing every day. A few additional interesting numbers. So most of US and UK organizations that utilize bots have developed clear compliance-driven guidelines, basically saying we need to regulate it until someone else will do it. We'll at least do our part, and we'll try to make these guidelines internally to make sure it's not being served for bad things. In the US alone, 48% of those surveyed say that they have guidelines in place to moderate all users of bots, while another 48% say they have guidelines relating to some users of bots. So it's still not very clear. Some are investing more than others in this bot regulation. A slim majority of respondents are satisfied with the current level of regulation related to bot use. This is 47% of those in US organizations and 60% in those in the UK. Meanwhile, 45% of US organizations And a third of UK organizations say they actively want to see increased external regulation of bots. So let's just summarize all of this slide. Everyone are using bots, not just for web data collection. Generally speaking, you can pretty much say that everyone are using bots. Everyone also understand that you need to take it seriously. Some of them add their own standards, their own regulations internally in the company, but almost all of them want decision makers to help with regulation, with standards, with norms. So how does the industry use bots? We talked about a few things, web data collection and other things. Unsurprisingly, customer service topped the list with 76%. These are, for example, these bots that you can see when you enter a website that's trying to sell you something. We all try to communicate with these type of bots at least one time, I'm sure. Data-related applications are the second most common use of bots across both geographics. We're still talking about UK and US. 69% of UK and 48% of US respondents to this survey are using bots for data-related applications. The rest of the use cases listed here are by popularity. So for cyber security, backend tasks, trading, social media engagement. Again, the common thing between all of them is, okay, we had a human being doing that so far. Can it be automated with bots to make it better, faster, more efficient, sometimes also cheaper? That's our reality. This is what's currently going on and happening in the world. So clearly by this slide, data and customer service at the forefront, and you need working framework for responsible conduct. Now let's look at the challenges ahead of our discussion and break. We're going to take a short break after this slide because we talked a lot and we need to digest and to rest a bit. So do we need to regulate it or not? We'll talk about that. Is it possible to regulate it? Are industry guidelines enough, or we really need decision makers and authorities to jump in and help out? It's not always a good thing, maybe it is. And will regulation even solve the problem? What is the problem? These are the questions that we'll talk about. But let's take a 10-minute break. I'll be more than happy if you can come up with your own questions for the discussion. If you want, we have enough to talk about, Dr. Simon and myself. Let's be back in 10 minutes from now. We'll start again in a few seconds. Okay, great. Back from the short break. Let's have an open discussion right now. So again, thank you, Dr. Tomer Simon, for joining. It's an honor for us to have you here as an expert in this field. Just as a recap, we talked generally about what we as a company are doing and our connection to bots with Bright Data. It's more from the web data collection point of view. We also mentioned a few other bot-related activities like these chats that you can talk to on the website. Let's get back to the questions that we raised, but really an open discussion. Dr. Simone and myself and each of you that want to ask something, raises a comment or feedback or a concern, please do that. I assure you that we'll answer everything. It's going to be interesting. So Tor, I'll be happy to get your perspective on what we're just talked for the past 40 minutes.
So we live in the age of AI. AI is really all around us, and it's the most two interesting facts around AI. First, as you mentioned, also it's about the data. AI feeds around a lot of data, and we need to feed this AI machine. Someone said a few years ago, data is the new oil. So this engine, the combustion engine that uses this refined oil that we need to improve, and the data is AI. And we have it in our homes. Maybe you have Alexa, Siri, you have it in your office tools, PowerPoint, Excel, Word. You use it maybe in ways, of course, the algorithms in Facebook, in Twitter, everything is in AI. And this is just the beginning. And the things that we know, but really AI is all around us. And the awareness to the challenges of AI, and also the first question here, whether to regulate or not to regulate, it really began around 3 years ago. If we look at the graph of the number of companies and organizations and governments that published or created some sort of an ethical AI guidelines and principles, increased from 2018, it was like around 20. Today we have more than 120. So, and this is just in the last 3.5 years. And this is the awareness. The social implications of AI are huge. We see it in the news everywhere, the implication. And there is a very interesting book that I recommend people who are involved and are doing AI, especially data scientists. It's called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford. It's a Yale publication. It's very, very interesting. And it shows this supply chain and the behind the scenes of AI. It's the human labor, the mineral labor, the impact of it on the global scale. It's not only the privacy and ethical issues, it's also the physical and environmental impact that AI has on the world. And today, and I'll refer to this first question, to regulate or not to regulate, the EU, the European Union, last April, so 5 months ago, released they were the first globally to release a draft regulation around AI with specific limitations about mass surveillance, or public surveillance, social scoring, social accrediting system, and of course, systems that do harm. And what is harm? It's a good question, but they were the first to have it. But if I go back to 2018, regulation is not only legislation by the parliament or the government, it can also be self-regulation. So if Microsoft, for example, released our responsible AI already almost 4 years ago, and just October 1st, we released our second version, this is also regulation. So we have various types and levels of regulation, but we do understand that we need to do something, because AI, and we saw just the implication from Cambridge Analytica to other cases of AI, that society, governments, and nations may require some sort of regulation, but the question is also what type of regulation and the timing of regulation. Are we doing it too early, too late? And how do we regulate a technology that's AI? And I say it's the most complex technology that humans have ever developed, that we do not know why it works. We know how it works. We don't know why it works, why it gives the answer, the decision, the prediction that it gave. And this is why we need the explainability, this responsible AI frameworks. And so how can we regulate something that we really don't understand? And these unintended consequences, how can you regulate something that you really have many blank or unknown unknowns? And this is why many organizations, governments are going to this ethical framework.
Can you share an example of something like that, that you know what, that someone created with good intentions, but eventually that bot or whatever it was caused damage, or was in the course of causing damage?
So damages can't be, damage is not always objective. It's also maybe, from my perspective, it's very subjective, whether who was exposed to the chatbot or to the bot. Maybe if you have this, I can give you an example. You have these smart replies, you have it in Google, you have it in Teams, you have these automated replies. So if, for example, this automatic reply shows you a response that is offensive and you didn't click it, so you don't click it. So was it damaging? So who was affected? How was affected? And I give you the example to the extreme. Around March or May, I don't know, remember 2016, 5 years ago, Microsoft released a chatbot that was called Tay, T-A-Y. You can read about it on Google. It was a very successful chatbot in China. And Microsoft, it was before I joined Microsoft, I can tell you. And Microsoft said, okay, if it's so successful, let's create a Twitter avatar using this chatbot that will interact with regular people on Twitter. So I can tell you that it was shut down less than 24 hours. It became homophobic, racist, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi with unbelievable swearing and curses that he learned from us. This is the discourse online and on social media. We are aware of it. We know what's going on. And if we release something that, you know, unintended consequences, it learns from us. AI is a learning and evolving technology. So if we don't put these guardrails and maybe ethical principles, how it learns, from what it learns, what is the impact of the learning, so it might be offensive. We saw, I think it was both in Google and in Facebook, by the way. If you searched for example, in Google, it was if you search on Google Images for a gorilla, it showed also people of color, mainly black people, and it was very offensive. So they just removed the label of gorilla, that you won't be able to search for gorilla. And also Facebook, just 2 months ago, they had 2 or 3 months ago, they had the same problem. And these are still the limitations of AI. We have these social biases because it learns from data. So if society is biased, AI might be biased as well. And this is why we want AI not to be biased. And I can tell it's also a question. If society is biased, okay, should AI be the one the one technology to fix it? Again, it's a complex. Of course, we don't want to offend, harm anyone. It's not the issue. It's about the moral and ethical discussion around the implications, and of course about our privacy. So if you take the Cambridge Analytica, we saw what you can do with our data about us, that you can really know what we think, what we vote, and how to even manipulate us online, that will change our mind maybe on some issues. So it's a very complex range of issues.
Complex but interesting. Basically, what you're saying is that currently it acts like a mirror for us, for the society, which is not necessarily a good thing, but maybe it is. I mean, so it's still a discussion that, or still something to discuss, because what I guess it depends on the goals of this AI or this bot. Do you want it to mirror the society or not? Which obviously I can't answer. And that's very complicated, but very interesting. And now I also understand why you're saying it's the first time that humanity even needs to think and eventually decide on such things. Very interesting. I can share from our side that, and I'll get back to the first question, if to regulate or not to regulate. And I think that the answer is yes, but need to understand how to do it effectively. From what we're doing, which is different type of bots that collect data from the web, we saw how you can damage something. It was actually a very objective damage, not a subjective one. For example, you're doing it in very high scale without taking into consideration the website that you are approaching in order to extract the public data from, and it's loading on that website too much that it crashes. So we'll make sure that it won't happen, but this is something that can happen and you need to be aware of it. So you've built this bot in order to do good, in our case, collect data, in the example that you gave, to communicate effectively with humans, but then you realize that someone can misuse it, even unintentionally, and it can cause more harm than good. So how do you even know that something bad is happening? I understand with the Twitter example with Ty, that it was just all around, and Microsoft are working in huge scales, being one of the largest tech companies in the world. So it's pretty easy to catch it very fast in under 24 hours. But in smaller scales, or even when you just start in large scale, how can you measure, monitor that it's actually doing what you intended it to do?
So this is part of this ethical principles or ethical guidelines. But for example, you have explainability, you have privacy, you have safety, you have fairness, you have trustworthiness. You have many principles that various organizations are using, and different names, but the meaning is the same. But if you want the AI to behave ethically, or for example, to reduce bias as much as possible, you need to go back to the supply chain, to the data, and how do you de-bias your data? How do you know? How do I find even the bias? Because maybe I'm biased as a data scientist, and I don't see it. I don't know. For me, this is life. Okay, so how do I de-bias information, and how do I? By the way, how do you, for example, if you take a friend or someone from your family or something from your work that you mentioned that he is trustworthy, what is it, and how do you make AI trustworthy? And what is fairness? How do you give, for example, AI for recruiting that goes over CVs? How do you make sure that it's fair and it's de-biased? We know the example, the famous example with Amazon and the CVs, because AI gives us also the ability of prediction, forward and future looking, but it's
Can you just
dependent.
share about that example with Amazon and CVs?
Yeah, so they used an AI to sort CVs for recruitment, and they saw that because AI runs the model on past information, they saw that usually it's white males that are successful. So if you are not white male, you will not pass the screening, okay, of the AI, because they want the success. So for example, if you're a woman, so you had less chances, and the AI can also understand ethnic and racial just according names, for example, and it will know. So you see companies that require don't mention the gender, even don't mention the name, don't mention even your city today, because it's probably a biasing factor for AI. So this is also a challenge. But again, how do you make it? and how do you regulate it? So these are the frameworks. And we have, for example, also internally, we have committees that make sure that the AI, first of all, the use case itself is reviewed and approved, and then we put the guardrails, and we make sure that all along the ways, we make sure the guardrails are in place, and for us and for, I can tell you also with customers. So the regulation is internal and external, because we provide a very robust and wide AI platform. So we don't want it to be used for negative impact. And so again, if you want to have future predictions, but you rely on data that you collected from the past, so how can you break this history and make a new future that you are always relying on your past? So how can you de-bias, whether it's the judicial system, the jails, for example, the corrections department in the US, or any system, because everything is on the past. So it's a very complex issue to see how we do predictions of future that is very different from our past.
That's very interesting. Also in real life, not just bots and AI. This consideration of how you can change the course of thinking when everything that you know, because this is what your life experience.
It's called unlearning. I can tell. I want to share just a leadership thought it's from the Bible, from the Old Testament, when Moses goes up Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the covenant from God. It took him 40 days and 40 nights, and the people, his people, the Israelites, lost their patience and started worshipping the calf idol. And once he saw it, when he came back from God with the 10 commandments and everything, with the rules and all of the book, the first thing he did when he saw, he broke the tablets, because he understood reality has changed. I cannot stick to my old perceptions, and I need to do unlearning and to drive. And this is something that we should do, both as leaders, as data scientists, to see how we do this unlearning and create and adopt and adapt to a changing reality.
That's very interesting, and at least computers can't fight over something. If you coded it right, they'll do what you wanted them to do. So, but okay. So before we continue,
AI is not deterministic. This is the challenge, that these unintended consequences, these are the things that you did not program it to do. How do you test? How do you do QA for unintended consequences? So how can you regulate it, or how can you even say that you can't even predict this unintended consequence?
Yeah. So how do you create? I mean, you need to think of so many scenarios. You will never cover everything. That's interesting. Before we continue, I see 0 questions, which doesn't make sense. So please, all of you, feel free to ask anything if you experience something similar while browsing the web. If you just have ideas or questions, we have a lot of experience that we can share and a lot of interesting things to talk about. Please feel free. You can write in the chat. You won't have to speak up. We can just read it. So
I'll jump to the question number 3. It's connected also to probably to the crowd here, because we're a very diverse society, and of course universities. So industry-wide guidelines. So usually, and this is also part of the self-reflection and self-criticism, putting a mirror. When we see the big tech, they are US-based, and the ethical guidelines are based on the Judeo-Christian tradition. But if, for example, they're implemented in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, so it's called digital colonialism, that they see that someone is imposing his ethical guidelines on our society. So how can you also interact with this situation? And this is something that in the last 2 years, it's an increasing debate, especially, by the way, in Africa. They see it, so again, the colonialism, the European and the US are now imposing their ethical guidelines on the entire continent. If you want to use AI, it's according our ethical guidelines. So again, it's regulation, it's not regulation, it's ethical, it's not ethical. It's a complex discussion.
So maybe in 20 years' time, and we have this recorded, we'll see, unfortunately, the first war that started due to digital colonialism. That's a scary thought.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah.
But this is a debate that is going on. So in Africa, they created a very interesting center to discuss this, the ethical framework for AI for Africa. And I'll just give you an example that I love to share regarding what is ethics. Ethics is not right or wrong. It's not something that is lawful or not lawful. If we go back to the medieval times again, we see in medicine, we see all these fables and fairy tales, Snow White, Cinderella. We have always this stepmom. Why do you have all this stepmother? So you'll say in literature we need this bad, we need a bad character in it. No, it's reflecting what happened really in Europe, because around 50% of women died during childbirth. So you say, okay, it was very bad medicine. No, it was an ethical dilemma that in Christianity, if a baby that is going to be born is threatening the mother, in Christianity, you kill the mother and save the baby. Okay, so this is an ethical. So, but in Judaism, by the way, if the baby is threatening the mother, you kill the baby, because the mother can bring more babies, and the baby is maybe going to murder the mother. But what happens now if you have a Jewish doctor giving birth to a Christian mother and the baby is threatening the mother? Does he operate according to his ethical guidelines and moral life? I need to kill the baby and save the mom, or according to the mom's, and she'll tell him, kill me, save the baby. This is ethics, and it's very, very complex.
Wow, and you just made it more complex with this example. It's crazy. Wow. I'll just, before answering the first question, just again, from our point of view, from Data's point of view, how we see ethics. First of all, I totally agree that it's not what's legal and what's not. That's actually easier, because you know if something is legal or not. You can read it. It's there. It's written. One example is the GDPR regulation. I love it as a data company, because finally I know what I can and cannot do. It's not always fun or easy to comply with, but at least I know the borders, and then I can decide to respect them or not. And obviously we do, but that's, you have the validity of what's going on and what the borders are. In ethics, for example, again, in our world, we decided 3 years ago not to support a very potentially profitable use case, because it was completely legal. We checked that, but we couldn't understand the value to the world. So it was the ability to open fake accounts on social media. For some reason, we saw massive demand to that. People came to our platform, asked to do that. And we scratch our head trying to understand why the hell it can benefit someone. And we understood the motivation of these potential customers. They can sell these accounts and do fake likes and fake comments and fake engagement on social media. Turns out people will pay for it. But we decided not to support such a use case, even though that it was legal. I think that today it's not, because we have this own personal test that we're doing when we have these questions. It's not, it won't fit any business, and it's probably missing a lot of elements, but for us it's working. We just take out the money factor from it, just because we're a business, we're a commercial company. We just put it aside. We assume that we won't earn anything and it won't cost us anything. And then we recheck this use case, trying to understand if we'll be proud doing it. And the answer in opening fake social media accounts, if let's say we won't earn anything and it won't cost us anything, all of us said unanimously that no, we won't be proud of that. So that's in our own small world. This is the test that we're taking to try and decide if it's ethical in our standards, yes or no. Okay, so there's one question: who is regulating the search engines? Who is guiding the ethics? That's a good question. Dr. Simon, would you like to take that, as Microsoft also have a search engine?
So I can refer to a few examples, and search engines are supervised and regulated, for example, in the EU and the US, because, for example, take Google or Bing, whatever, it was mainly around the EU that Google promoted its own pages on Google search. Okay, so is it ethical? It's your platform and content, so it is scrutinized, supervised, and regulated, but you really, most of the time, you know only through the results, and you don't know what is the algorithm or how the algorithm really works. So you just see the output, and then you analyze it and run a lot of tests, and then you see maybe it's biased towards a specific vendor, maybe it's biased towards me, that I'm always coming number one and I'm owning the platform. So of course, it's a complex issue, but the EU is very, very sensitive for search engines.
Yeah, we can see every other week some new decision regarding search engines and what's okay and what's not okay. Basically, or usually after it happened. So someone complained about something, and the EU is deciding a lot about what's right and what's wrong in their jurisdiction. Any other questions before we move forward? We don't have much time left, so please feel free to write additional questions. In the meantime, so it seems to me that the first step when you do something that has anything to do with bots, with AI, and things like that, first of all, you need to understand that it's a lot more than just doing it. You need to understand the considerations and the consequences. You need to read a lot and understand that, okay, there is some framework. Maybe we have 120, I think you said, different frameworks, but I assume that many elements are similar, maybe different terminology, but the organizations are usually talking about the same things. So acknowledgement that there is a problem, I think it's the first step. When you start working with AI bots and things like that. Do you agree?
So I don't want to articulate it in a negative. It's not that there is a problem, that you understand that it's a complex technology, that there are many sensitivities that you need to take into account. And part of this awareness and desire to be the best version of yourself as an organization and as of your AI is to work with these ethical principles. As you mentioned, I think one of the review articles said around 200 various principles, but most of them are, as you mentioned, different variations of the same. But it's very important that if you develop AI, whether internally or if you provide an AI platform that works for customers, that customers can work on top of it, the ethical guidelines is a very important step for the awareness of the developers, of the managers, but also of the customers. And it's also one of the challenges that we see within organizations, that how do you operationalize principles? So it's one of them is there are things that you can find online, like checkboxes for developers and for data engineers. But the problem of it is it's called tick box ethics. Is it okay that I just outsource it? Okay, check ethics, bias. Is this really ethics? But it might be a good first step to raise the awareness. Usually some organizations have advisory boards. So can I really outsource my ethics? I say, I'm the engineer, he's in charge of ethics. Okay, so it's a discussion that we need to have in the organization. And it's a very important discussion to have internally and externally with the society. It's the customers, the government maybe, but it will position the organization, the company, the technology in a different scale. And of course, we see that the more the company is ethical, the more business it's going to do in the future. And of course, as you mentioned, it's highly in the awareness. You can see it in the US and the EU. The discussion is always there. Every day you can find news items in the biggest news channels around AI.
And I think that you actually answered the fifth question. So yes, it should be up to every organization to own, for sure, as long as there's no one regulation to follow, but probably also after. So even after the relevant governments will set up a regulation that everyone will agree on, it's still up to the specific organization to think, to act, to be proactive and make sure that all of these things are actually happening, and it's not just taking checkbox that someone else wrote for us. I totally agree.
Exactly, and these guidelines and these processes and maybe the ethical bureaucracy in the training will make the organization much better prepared once the regulation comes, not like what happened with GDPR, that organizations scrambled millions, billions of dollars because it surprised them that, privacy is an issue.
I totally agree. That's a very healthy way to think about it as a business, I think, and in general. So last chance to write your questions. We still have just a few minutes left. And in the meantime, I'll think that I'll start to summarize. And Dr. Simon, feel free to jump in if you want to share anything else. So we started talking about how data can be used for good. We just gave a few examples and a few real companies that are using, in this case, our products to extract web data and do good with it. And we then moved to a more, I think, a very interesting discussion about what's actually happening today. It's not the future. It's maybe a vision, but it's already happening today, which is how to work with bots, with AI. Should there be regulation? Yes, no, how, and all of these things. And I want to thank you, Tomer, for joining this interesting session. And just a quick, a very quick summary of maybe a few takeaways, you know what, not a summary, a few takeaways that everyone can take for their own world. If you're a student that will join to a company soon, or currently working somewhere, or studying, or thinking of opening something on your own, maybe a few key elements to ensure responsible and compliant data collection, but also bot development and AI technology. So first of all, I think that transparency is something crucial. Just like the discussion we had today, we talked about good things and bad things, being transparent inside the organization. That's probably the only way to make sure that everything will rise to the surface, and then you can actually identify the issues, the problems, the dangers, then to solve them, or just make sure everything is out there known. The second thing is identifying what's going on. In this case here, in this example, in the presentation is from our world again, is the traffic. So what the bots that are actually going to the websites, what are they doing, what website they're going to, what their goal is it good? I mean, does it make sense what it serves? But in other examples, if it's another type of bot, again, it's the same questions are valid. What's the goal of this bot or of this AI code? The third thing is regulation. Again, here is about traffic, but it's true to anything else, not just web traffic. So once everything is transparent, I know what's going on. Then I was actually able to identify what's going on there and understand the goals of what I'm building. Then start with self-regulation. Just talking about it, it doesn't have to be a 100-page document. Maybe it will end up this way, or maybe it will end up by just making sure you follow the regional regulation. But just saying the word regulation or framework or standards, norms, it's important. It's something that it's important. This education for the company or any entity you're in is important. And this last thing is probably adding some security measurements. So things will happen. You have good intentions, you identified things, you've wrote sophisticated code to try and make sure you're doing good. Always be under the assumptions that something might go wrong. When this happens, try to have these security measurements to limit the damage. It's a lot to talk about, it's a lot to think about. It's a very complicated subject, but I'm happy that we had this session, and I see that there are no further questions at the moment. Sorry, yeah. So I'll just finish by saying thank you for listening, and thank you, Dr. Simon, for joining. And it was a pleasure to have you, and pleasure to have everyone listening. And feel free to contact us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.